I want to welcome everyone to our business entities presentation with Bill Hulsey. He is a member of the SCORE Boston chapter, and we're very pleased to have him presenting this topic for us. He knows pretty much everything there is to know, and we'll be able to answer questions you might have along the way. So let's get going with our introduction to SCORE in case you don't know all the things that we offer as an organization. So our main focus and goal is to share small business information and education with you. And we do that in a couple different ways. One is through our website, score.org, lots of articles, blogs, videos, lots of great information for you to dig through and read up on. There's also templates you can download and use for business planning, budgeting, marketing, lots of great information. The other way we share information is through our webinars and workshops. We do have quite a few in-person workshops this fall, but we definitely still have those webinar based if that's better for you. So I strongly encourage you to watch for our newsletter, watch social media, and check out the website to see what events are coming up. But I think the most important way that we help the small business community is through our mentoring. Mentoring is free. Our mentors are volunteers that are giving of their time to help the small business community. We're working with those that are trying to decide if they should start their own business, those that are in that planning phase, and those that are already in business. Folks come to us for just a wide variety of topics that you can even imagine. And we definitely try and help them from our local chapter. If not, we have a national database of mentors that we can reach out to find what you need to get the answers you need. So a beginning session is going to run probably 40-45 minutes. They want to learn about you. They want to know what your goals are, what your challenges are, and they're going to help you come up with a plan to overcome and reach those goals. Often other mentors are brought in or invited by your primary mentor to help fill in any gaps as your needs change. So it's a really wonderful experience, I think, for both the client and for the mentors. They learn along the way too. So getting a mentor is super, super easy if you don't already have one. Go to the score.org website. The easiest thing would be to put your zip code in the little blue box, and that'll match you to the chapter that's nearest you. And then a little questionnaire will pop up. There's a free form area that kind of asks what your question are. If you can let us know like what your primary goal at the time is and what kind of business you are, that helps us match you to the mentor in our chapter that can assist you. So we are glad that you're here with us today. We are recording, so we will share this recording on our website about 24 to 48 hours should you want to watch it again. You'll find it at score.org/Boston. If you look under local workshops previously recorded, it'll be listed there. You can throw questions into the Q&A for me so I don't lose track of them in chat. Everything else can go into chat, that's fine. But we will definitely address any questions that you have along the way. So I'm going to give Bill an opportunity to bring up his slides that he wants to share today. And you can begin when you're ready, Bill.
Okay. Thank you. And good afternoon, I should say, everybody. I'm hoping you can see that. Okay.
Looks good.
Trying to be in slideshow there. Let's get back to number one. Let me just add one thing to what Teresa said, which is a lot of times people may feel that they're not ready to talk to SCORE. And we want you to think just the other way, which is we would love to talk to you even if you're just kind of in the dream stage, because we can help you think about how to start turning that dream into a reality and make sure that you do it in a way that is cost effective and you don't end up wasting money or you don't start in the wrong place. And today's discussion is an example of that, because it's not uncommon for us, me in particular, and some of my colleagues, to get an initial meeting with somebody that's already spent money on an LLC. And, that's in Massachusetts, that's over $500. And then maybe they've also invested money in a web page and so on. And as you talk to them, you realize they don't really have put much thought into their business plan and so on. And so that's money that they could have saved until further down the road. So don't hesitate to come see us wherever you are in the process. So with that, let me get started here. Um, Again, this is just a little disclaimer that these are general legal principles. I know some of you may be from Rhode Island. The rules aren't terribly different, but this is really pretty much focused on the rules in Massachusetts. So if you have questions, there is a Rhode Island, I think, office of SCORE in Providence. You could talk to the folks down there, or you could send me an email or get on my calendar, and we can dig in a little bit to the extent to which the rules may be a little different in Rhode Island. So with that being said, I want to talk to you today about some common business entities that start with no business entity, and we'll move from there. But and just to reinforce what I said earlier, it's part of your business model. So we want you to be thinking about not only what you want to sell and who you want to sell it to and so on, but some other elements where your capital is going to come from and so on. And it's also part of your risk management strategy. I think Teresa will tell you we've got another workshop that we do on insurance and risk management. And my colleague Dave Berman is going to be doing some stuff on some of those issues in kind of an additional part of this. So I encourage you to attend that one too, so that you can get kind of the full picture of how we help clients think about businesses and their entities and so on. So let me start with this, and this goes back to my first point again, which is the entity that you choose is a conclusion and not a premise. You don't start with an LLC and then figure out how to go from there. You start with some questions. How are you going to capitalize your organization? Are you going to have owners? Are you going to have members? Are you going to have investors? Where's the money going to come from? How do you want to distribute revenues? How many people are going to be involved in the actual performance of the work of the business? There are tax issues that you may want to consider. And then depending, in some cases, what your status as a citizen or permanent resident, and the status of people that might be shareholders or members or so on. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll be able to have a little decision tree in your head about the things you either know that lead you to the right kind of entity, or the things that you need to know before, again, maybe you invest $500 or so in forming an entity type that really isn't best suited for you. So the first one, you start in a position of having no entity. And for our purposes, I'm going to distinguish between a sole proprietorship, which means you're doing business as yourself with no overarching entity, and a single member LLC or a single member business entity. There'd really be no need to be a single member corporation. But so I'm going to distinguish the word proprietorship, which means you own the business and you are the business, and there's no entity over you, and a single member LLC. So in terms of risk management and other things, the sole proprietor is the entity. Obviously, your income is directly attributed to you, and you file it on your 1040, perhaps with a Schedule C from self-employment income. But it's all yours, and it's all there and taxed to you at the individual level. The major distinction between that and the LLC is that you're also personally liable for not only the debts, but the actions of the business. So if you're in a business where you have the potential to do harm to somebody. You put a roof on somebody's house and the roof leaks and damages the property. Um, that's not going to be you're not going to be protected individually if the homeowner comes after you, and they're going to come after your personal assets to satisfy any liability or judgment. So there are certainly times when it doesn't make sense, or it doesn't make sense right away to be an LLC. You're just starting up, you're doing something that's incredibly low risk, for example. But for most cases, and particularly as you're doing your business planning, you want to start building in the costs of getting yourself registered, which is an annual fee, and then figuring out what kind of entity, as we talk about today, is best for you. So that's part of your projecting what it's going to cost to run the business, along with your costs of goods and costs of marketing and whatever else you're going to incur, costs of rent if you're going to be in a brick and mortar. So the next entity type, and the one that we see primarily and is really a great option for many, many of you, is what's called the limited liability company. And I emphasize the word company because a lot of people think the C stands for corporation, but it doesn't. So it's a limited liability company, and you can be, again, a single member LLC or a multi-member LLC. Like the sole proprietor, one of the great benefits of the LLC is that it is not taxed. So the income of the LLC goes to the individual member or members. And the great benefit as well is that it gives you statutory and common law protection that limits your liability in most cases to the assets of the company. And kind of the limitations on that are, if you don't run the company as if it's separate from your personal life, you try to include all your personal expenses on the company expense. You don't have a separate bank account. You don't do the things to act as if you personally believe that LLC is distinct from you personally. Then there's an opportunity to do what's called piercing the corporate veil, which is an old-fashioned term to say, I'm going to go through that corporate entity and then I'm going to come after you. But again, if you run your LLC correctly, you're going to be very much protected from personal liability. You'll hear this in the other workshop, but just briefly, the other two pieces of this risk management, one is making sure you have insurance for almost any business. And it's not because you're going to do wrong, but it's because somebody might think you do wrong and you need somebody to cover your costs of defense or having a lawyer respond. And the other piece is contracts. So I think Dave is going to get into those. And we've got a great guy who works on contract models for your clients, for your subcontractors, and so on. So again, use us for all of those services. So again, the liability is there. One thing you need to consider if you're a single member LLC, and I raise this in the context of folks who may not be U.S. citizens or permanent residents, is that income from a single member LLC is considered employment-based wages. So if you're not authorized to work in the United States, you can't be a single member LLC. And you can own an LLC, you can invest in an LLC, but you have to have a partner who's a U.S. or permanent resident based, and your income is going to be treated as partnership income, not as employment-based income. So again, we don't want to dig too deep in the weeds there, but a lot of times we have folks who are here on visitors visas and so on, and they may even be work authorized on an H visa for an employer, but that doesn't mean, but they want to start an LLC. So you have to be very careful with that. And if there's anybody in the audience that's on one of those non-resident visas, you know that you don't want to play with your legal status by working illegally. So The multi-member LLC is taxed as a partnership. A single member LLC, you're going to report your income on what's called Schedule C of Form 1040, IRS 1040, which is your standard, income tax form. If you're a multi-member, you or your accountant or whoever will issue what's called a K-1, and that will reflect the partnership income that all of you who are multi-members receive as part of the activities of the LLC. Within a multi-member, and we'll talk about this a little below, but you can have people who are actually managers and are running the business, and others who are more passive. So in Massachusetts, I think it's the same in Rhode Island, although I learned it's not the same in New York. So if anybody's from there, it's a different rule. But the professional limited liability company is an option for people who practice in licensed professions. Like if you're a doctor, a dentist, a chiropractor, even some beautician trades and so on require that you be licensed. And this little variation is a way for you to be able to create the LLC, but segregate the liability of each professional within the LLC to their own behavior. So if you're a member of a PLLC and one of your colleagues gets in trouble, you're not going to get in trouble for that. So it's a nice little distinction there if you're in one of those regulated fields.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, any questions there before I move on?
Yeah, can you kind of go over, so from with an LLC, it would be a Schedule C for self-employed income, and that's with the single member LLC files, is that correct?
Yeah, if you do your own taxes on and use any of the software packages, they're going to ask you questions, in their questionnaire format about where your income comes from. And they'll say, do you have any W-2 income, which would be from employment? Do you have any 1099 income, which would be as an independent contractor? And then it will say, do you have any income from self-employment or a trade or business? And those questions are going to populate Schedule C. So that's where you would keep not only your income, but all your related deductions. So another pitch I guess I will make for you, and Teresa will be able to explain these if needed, is we run a lot of workshops on how to set up QuickBooks, which is a way for you to, people like to use an Excel spreadsheet. QuickBooks is probably preferred in part because it will populate your tax software for you. But you want to start keeping all of those deductions, even deductions and expenses that you're incurring before you start generating income. So you want to be able to carry those forward. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So again, quickly moving from there, we're going to go to a little more complex organization. So again, when I mentioned before that your choice of entity is going to be driven by your business model, let's say that you expect to be able to raise capital through the issuance of shares as opposed to loans and so on. So this is a classic situation in which you would want to be a C corporation. If you envision at some point down the road that you'll be attractive to a venture capital firm or somebody who would like to come in and purchase part of your business in exchange for capital to allow you to grow, they're most likely going to want to see you become a C corporation. And it's not terribly difficult to convert from an LLC, but those companies, shareholders that want a secured equity interest in your company will want to see that C corporation. One benefit is that the individuals are not liable for the actions or debts of the corporation. There's no limits in a C corp in terms of who's going to be a shareholder, and which can be good news if, again, if you're here in the country, but you have family or friends overseas and they want to help you start a U.S. business. We often see a lot of people that want to be over here and run an import-export business, for example, with folks in their home country. This is a good way to capitalize that. The downside to the C Corp, with an exception that we'll talk about in a second, is that both the corporation and the shareholders or employees are taxed. So there's a larger tax hit. Again, always subject to deductions and expenses, but you are going to incur more of a tax liability if you establish yourself as a C corporation. So just moving again with a little more nuance, if you're in a professional field, a regulated field, a variation on the PLLC, the Professional Limited Liability Company, is a professional corporation. Again, people do that because they want to be able to raise capital through the issuance of shares and so on. And that's a way for you to get the benefit of, again, capital without people who are considered members of your organization or managers. So they would have no governing role in the performance of the professional corporation. Again, no individual liability, but again, that double taxation when the corporation receives income and then when it distributes income, either in the form of capital distributions to shareholders or wages to people that are considered employees of the corporation. So kind of a variation between something we're going to talk about in a minute, the nonprofit, and a for-profit, is this benefit corporation. And a benefit corporation is a for-profit corporation. There are specific rules in Massachusetts related to that, but they differ in a couple important respects. One of the things is that they give the managers, the directors and officers of the corporation, more broadened fiduciary duty. And the reason that's important is the directors and officers of a C Corp, let's say a true corporation, owe their primary fiduciary duty to the shareholders. And that means maximize profits. So if you decided, for example, that you wanted to have more generous employee benefit plans, maternity leave, or, you pick your issues, you wanted to pay salaries above market and so on, and, do more what they consider public benefit, you would be entitled to do that if you qualify as one of these B Corps or benefit corps. And, we see a fair number of those, and people that don't really have a nonprofit model, but they want to do better by their employees and their maybe even their customers, and sell for reduced prices and so on. So there's a lot of benefits there. The two things that are the trade-offs in order to kind of loosen the fiduciary obligations to the shareholders. One is there's formal oversight of the public benefit mission. When I create a C Corp, I don't have to tell the state much of anything, as long as I promise that I'm not going to do anything illegal. But I have to submit my plan to why I'm entitled to be a B Corp to the state. And then I have to report to them regularly, to the Mass Attorney General, about how I'm doing to achieve the benefit goal that the state has approved, in order to allow me to exercise that fiduciary discretion and not maximize profits to my shareholders. So the next one, am I going a good speed? Everybody good?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So the next one is a partnership, which is, we talked about the multi-member LLC, and the distinctions are not terribly great between that. You can, they're formed when two or more individuals join together for a common business purpose. There's, again, no tax at the partnership level. Let's see here. Oh, we'll stay on this one for a minute. So there are different types of partnerships. You're probably familiar. There's one where all the partners are general partners, like a law firm or a medical practice or something. And then there are partnerships where some partners are what are called general partners, and they're running the company, and they have liability to what are called the limited partners. So a lot of times you'll see limited partner real estate ventures where I'll invest money. I don't want to be involved in running the property or building the property, but I see it as a good investment opportunity. So I'll come in as a limited partner. And that's a way to raise your capital, but limit the people who are governing the organization for you. So here's the little exception, I guess, that I was talking about earlier. Uh, There are types of entities that can, and first off, a lot of people, and I just saw one of these scheduled with me the other day, say that they want to set up an S corporation. So the first thing you need to remember is that the S corporation is a tax status. It's not an entity. You have to have an entity like an LLC or a C corp or a partnership in order to go to the IRS. And the S refers to subchapter S, which is small businesses. So the S corp election is a way for you to tell the IRS, even though I look like I should be taxed in a different way, if I meet these certain criteria, I would like to be treated in a different way that is going to reduce my tax burden. And so the S corp reduces your tax burden in a couple of ways. First, let's say that you're a C corp. If you're a C corporation, as we said, the corporation is going to be taxed. But if you meet the criteria to take the S corp election, they're not going to collect that tax at the corporate level. So you're going to reduce that tax load immediately. And then the tax will go down, and the tax can be distributed either as wages to the employees or as, kind of capital gains and the distributions that you would distribute to a shareholder. Because it's for small businesses, there are some limitations. One is it's no more than 100 shareholders. And the second part goes back in part to the resident status of the people forming the company. They must be U.S. citizens or permanent residents. And if you're thinking about venture capital money, they can't be corporate shareholders. So it's a way to say, okay, we're going to treat you like a small business, but we're going to rule out certain classes of people. And that's part of the trade-off. The liabilities are the same. You can have non-working shareholders that are just in the entity. If you're an LLC, these can be beneficial if you're making, it's maybe not worth it if you're not making a ton of money. But at a certain point, you may say, I don't want all of my wages to be treated as W-2 income or taxes from employment, just because of my tax structure. So I want to have some of that treated as capital gains. And that's something that the S corp would allow you to do. It's not something you should do without an accountant, because they really have to sit down and run the numbers with you to tell you which of these is the best path for you to take. But it is available. It's very widely elected. I guess I hope there are no accountants out here. I don't want to offend anybody, but a lot of accountants aren't really clear on this to begin with, and they think you're creating an entity, A, and that's not the case. But B, they seem to think it's it's a one size that fits everybody. And I think it probably isn't. And it's, the cost of having the accountant help you through the process of taking the election and the additional complications and fees related to filing and so on may not merit any tax savings that you would be seeing. So again, have that conversation with them. You can have a general conversation with my colleagues, and Teresa can definitely help you, connect with somebody that can put a little more nuance in that. We, just like we can't be your lawyers, we can't be your accountants on those sorts of things, but they can help you start to understand what the issues are a little more granularly than what I can do here for you. So though, before I move forward, those are basically an overview of all the for-profit and taxable entities. If there's no questions there, I'll move on to those of you who might be interested in a nonprofit. Anything there?
Yeah, I do have a clarification question.
Okay.
S corp status is given to certain C corps. Am I correct that a single member LLC, then a S corp is not relevant? Would like to
No,
understand
I
that.
don't think that's the case. Because let's say you're a very high earning sole single member LLC. My understanding, and again, I think this is true, is that you can take the S corp election, and instead of treating all your money as employment income, whatever that taxable rate may be, you would look to see, would I get a benefit if some of this income was treated as capital gains distributions, for example? So that's where you would want to talk to your accountant, because, I have a single member LLC client that makes about $500,000 a year. It's all hers, so it's all presumptively employment. But because of the S corp election, she's able to reduce her tax burden. She treats some of the money as wages and taxable as W-2, and the rest of it is a capital distribution at a lower rate.
Okay, are there entities that are best suited for specific types of companies? For example, like an import-export business you mentioned seems to be high risk. A high capital business compared to, let's say, an e-commerce scale business. Would you consider doing for the latter more of a sole proprietor? Does that make sense?
So I would never do a sole proprietor as uh, any business of any size, really. You want to get a corporate status. So let's rule those out unless you're, just a startup. You're making and selling stuff out of your house at this point and so on. But if you have a supply chain and you're online or have a brick and mortar, you want to have an entity. That's part of that three-legged risk management stool. If there aren't concerns about how you capitalize yourself, all of the entities are going to give you basically the same insulation from liability. The issue there, this is where I talk about the three legs, is really you're going to want to make sure that you have appropriate insurance. For example, if you're importing food products from another country where there's the risk that, you know, a friend of mine brought me, she'd been over in East Africa and brought me some wonderful coffee back from East Africa. And I made a cup and my whole body broke out in hives. So clearly there was something in there that was wrong that gave me an allergic reaction. And you don't want that kind of liability, but that's really where your insurance comes in, not only to respond, but also provide cost of defense. And the other thing, which I think we talk about more in the risk management, is having your contracts appropriately assign liability. So the structure really isn't going to matter terribly uh, between those. Obviously, if you're overseas and um, you've got investors over there, you need to consider the limitations that we talked about before. Does that answer that?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll move on then to nonprofits. A lot of our clients are wanting to do good. And again, this is the furthest well, away from the B Corp that we talked about, which is kind of a quasi attempt for a for-profit to look a little bit like a nonprofit. So let me again make a distinction. I like to call these, even though we call them nonprofit, a better term, and the term that the IRS uses is tax exempt organization. And the reason for that is if you're here in Massachusetts, you probably heard of Harvard University, which makes hundreds of millions of dollars in profit a year and has an endowment of over 20 billion the last I checked. So these are organizations that are making enormous profits, but their profits are not subject to tax. And that's the distinction. We have a little joke that, you know, nonprofit is not a business model. So if you're planning a nonprofit, you have to be sustainable. And that means you have to bring in more money than you spend, which is kind of a poor person's definition of a profit. So keep that in mind, just like any other business plan. Um, the process is different and more subject to scrutiny, obviously, in part because you're getting exempt from federal and state taxation. The liability issues are a little different here in Massachusetts too, but you're going to have to make your books publicly available. Any of you that are work in the nonprofit space know that there are two documents we do here, one for the federal government called the Form 990, and the Massachusetts corollary through the Mass Public Charities Division is called the Mass Form PC for public charity. And these are documents where you have to go into a lot more detail about your finances, where your money comes from and where it goes, because taxpayers want to be able to look and see, just as the government does, is this money that I'm donating or others have donated going to appropriate charitable causes. One of the major limitations on nonprofit organizations is that the profits can't be distributed to individuals. It's not uncommon for me or my colleagues to talk to somebody who sees nonprofit organization or tax exempt and thinks they can run a auto repair shop as a tax exempt organization. And we have to explain to them that the only types of organizations that get this from the state is ones that are doing kind of charitable work as has been defined. So if you were running a school, a trade school to bring, let's say, underemployed folks into the labor market by teaching them how to do auto repair and so on, that might be a nonprofit. But all that money's going to stay in the company. You're not going to be able to give yourself a big check at the end of the year from the fees related to repairing the cars and so on. So they want to see that these, in exchange for not paying taxes, you're somehow going to benefit the public in a way that the state recognizes. So we have if you're thinking about nonprofits, we have a very strong nonprofit practice group that can help you through this, depending on the size and complexity, or if you're starting up the, anticipated size and complexity. There's a very simple process using what's called the 1023 Form EZ, which is, just a couple pages long. If you're a bigger nonprofit or you anticipate being and your revenues are going to exceed a certain amount, the form is longer. But again, we have folks that can help you. And circling back, we certainly have folks that can help you walk through the, pardon me, the application process and talk to you in more detail about which of the for-profit entities are best for you. So here's a set of questions that I'm seeing more and more. I don't get out on the internet looking for this, but apparently a lot of people have gotten the idea that they should form their entity in Wyoming. I think it's cheap to file there. So the issue with forming the entity is, where are you doing business? Now, if you're totally online and you just happen to live in Massachusetts, but your sales, or you're running whatever, online counseling or life coaching or whatever, you're totally online, you might not have to register in Massachusetts. You'd still be subject to your taxes in Massachusetts as your individual taxes, but for the most part, the entities want you to be in the state and registered in the state, kind of where you are and your headquarters are and so on. Certainly, if you're running a brick and mortar, or you're doing your consulting or providing your services in Massachusetts, you're going to do business there. And there's no really bright line, but I always ask people to think about, what are you saving by registering in Wyoming? And what happens if Massachusetts comes knocking at your door and says, you've been in the wrong state? You need to be registered here. And oh, by the way, you haven't been collecting sales taxes for the past, X years. So just in terms of risk management, don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Again, we're always happy to help you, but there isn't a lot to be gained if you're a Massachusetts resident and, you're working out of here. There isn't a lot to be gained by saving $100 by registering in Wyoming and some other state, and taking the risk that, you know, the Mass Attorney General is going to come there on behalf of the Secretary of the Commonwealth and say, you're not really registered here, and now we got to fix that problem. If you are working, let's say you already have an LLC and you're working in another state, you can register as what's called a foreign entity doing business in Massachusetts. So that would be where, let's say you really are a Wyoming-based company, but you're bringing some operations into Massachusetts. You're going to create a brick and mortar, or you've got, significant consulting engagements or something like that in the state. Then you would register as a Wyoming corporation doing business. And again, it's a very simple, all these can be done online. Anytime you have a question, we have a great checklist that we can send you to do it. They're not tricky forms. They're not overly expensive. They are a deductible expense, and they're just part of your risk management strategies. You'll see at the bottom, I reference nolo.com. That's one of these online legal things. You don't have to hire them, but they have good step-by-steps about how to do almost any of these things, and they're specific to Massachusetts or whatever jurisdiction you're thinking about. Part of the process that you'll go through, especially if you're new, is you'll do what's called a name reservation. So if you're thinking about a startup, but you're not ready to pay the $500 and you're a little further, but you want to make, you've got a name that you love, you can go onto the Secretary of the Commonwealth's website here in Massachusetts and actually reserve the name. Check to see if it's available, and if it's available, you can reserve it for 60 days. So that will buy you some time to, if you're ready to go and you're really ready to go online or go live, that's a way to let you do that. The other thing that trips people up and is the requirement in Massachusetts and many states that you have a registered agent. The registered agent can be you. You can hire a company that serves as a registered agent. The limitation in Massachusetts is that it must be a physical address. You can't use a PO box. So sometimes people don't want to put their home address on these publicly available documents about their corporate filings and so on. There are companies that do it. Some of them do it very, like for $50 a year. I think UPS may have business centers that provide this service, as they give an actual physical address there at their UPS store. but you can't do the PO box. So just a few things. And again, you don't need to go it alone. You can always connect with one of us. We have 3 or 4 folks who are very adept at helping you through the formation process. So,
I have a question about the registered agent
yep,
situation. I hired a registered agent to keep my name out of the public, but then I had to do the BOIR, so it's out there anyway, correct?
your name in Wyoming, back to Wyoming, they don't require you to disclose the owners of the company, but in Massachusetts they do. So if I want to look, if you tell me you're, Teresa LLC, I can look up and yes, see who the people are that form that company.
Thank you.
Mhm. So here are some just quickly, and again, I think Dave talks about some of these, but these are documents that we can help you with. We have templates for a lot of these things. Stockholder, the first one is if you're a multi-member uh, LLC or a partnership, you want to have an agreement that defines the rights among the various members or among the various partners. We've got some models that can get you started and point out the issues that you want to be thinking about. We typically encourage people to get an attorney to go through the details of that with them. These are important documents. And I always say they're a little bit like a prenup in that they govern your relationship. And I've probably talked to a half a dozen or so, either multi-member LLCs or uh, several partners in a partnership where it falls apart. I just talked to one early last week. And they're like, well, what about this? I said, well, let's look in your operating agreement. And all the questions that they had answered there. They just kind of didn't like the answer. And the people they were disputing with are there. So they're important documents as much for when things are going well and how we're going to distribute profits and so on, but also what the rights are when things stop going well. So really critical in multi-member things. Bylaws, if you're a corporation, C Corp, you've got to have your bylaws in place. This is a governance document that tells people how you're going to make decisions, how many people are required to vote on a given issue, who the decision makers are. They have typically clauses about indemnification for the officers and so on. So again, we've got templates for you to at least get you started in thinking about things. If you're issuing stock, obviously you're going to want a stockholders agreement. And this is something, if you plan to raise capital through the issuance of stock, you're probably going to need to plan to get a lawyer. We have some pro bono counsel, but this may exceed what they're available to talk to you about. But it can be a regulated area. If you do some things wrong, you can get in trouble with the SEC's Securities and Exchange Commission. So again, not to frighten you, but just to put that in your mental checklist as you're thinking about how you're gonna capitalize your company. We talked about the S corp election. The EIN, if you're a single member LLC, you don't have to get an EIN, but you can. Any of the other ones, the entity is going a multi-member LLC partnership or corporation, you're going to need to get an EIN. Part of the NOLO checklist has the link right to the IRS page that tells you how to do that. And so I think the last thing here, just in case to leave you a few minutes, is the DBA certificate, or doing business as, or in Boston, city of Boston, they call it the business certificate. So a DBA is an alias. It's telling the world that either me as an individual or my corporate entity or my company is doing business under another name. It is not an entity. It doesn't give you any protection. And so a lot of people that are sole proprietors, again, no corporate structure, think they've created an entity with a DBA, but they haven't. But if, for example, you have, let's say you have an LLC and you've got one line of business that sells apparel, and then you want to have kind of rebrand in a different way to sell health food. You can say, I'm going to run it all into the same LLC, but I'm going to do a DBA for my health food brand, and I'm going to brand that differently. And you typically do those in the town in which the business is located. It's like $50 or so so they're cheap, but it's a way for me to say, who's behind this name? Is it a corporation? Is it an individual, or so on? So again, it's an alias, not an entity. And I think, my friend, that's it. I'm happy to answer your questions, but again, don't be shy about booking with us, because we really would rather talk to you and make sure you're on the right path and maybe test your ideas a little bit, rather than have to say, as we often or sometimes have to, boy, I wish you hadn't spent that money in this way. So,
Okay, I do have some questions.
okay.
What are the benefits of using an EIN versus your social security number for your LLC? Is there
Well, it's required in certain situations, and if you want to fully distinguish between, it helps say this is the entity's money and this is my personal money. So if you're, for example, when you're billing a customer and they want to pay you and they're going to issue you a 1099, you can put the EIN of the entity. So again, it's just doing as much as possible to create that distinction. If you're going in to create a business bank account, the bank may require you to have an EIN so that they are reporting it differently, because they're going to issue, if you earn interest or something, they're going to issue tax statements to you.
you have the LLC set up before you go to the bank for funding and get your bank account set up and things like that? What's first?
Okay, that's a great question. So first is the business plan. I really can't emphasize enough. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you and others, but we want you to have because you can get the LLC in probably 48 hours, and you can set up a bank account in that time or less, if you already have a banking relationship. But the thing we want to make sure is that you're confident that your business idea, unless it's already up and running, is a good one, and that it's going to make the kind of money and have the kind of success that you want. So again, you can do these other things so quickly, and they're very easy. So I would do that. Typically, what you would do as part of your preparing, you can get the EIN. I think before you've even established your entity in the state. I think the IRS doesn't check to see. And then once you have the entity in the EIN, you can go to the bank and create the account. Funding is an entirely different conversation. Do we do any workshops on funding, Teresa?
Oh
We
yeah, for
must.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to take one of those. SBA we're affiliated with them, and they're a very powerful lender here in the state for small businesses. There's a lot of ways to raise money, both through traditional lenders and non-traditional lenders. And I'd encourage you to attend some of those webinars and then talk to some of our colleagues who actually can go into detail and look at you. But typically what you're going to have to do is prepare a budget. If you're a startup and don't have revenues, you're going to have to at least put together a 3-year P&L, profit and loss projection. If you're in business, they're going to want to see as many years of tax returns, up to 3 years as they can. They won't go further back, but they're going to want to see that, because, they're taking a risk that you're going to be able to pay them back.
Oh, sorry, I was reading, reading a question.
I did stop
Um,
kind of quick.
yeah, can you talk about registering agents again? Do you have like some referrals for that? Um, is
There's
there
one I
any?
send everybody to. I mean, I don't know whether they're good or not, but I've sent dozens of people to this place if you're in Massachusetts. If you just Google registered agent Pittsfield, which is, as you know, in Western Mass, there's a place out there that says they'll do it for $49. I've never heard anybody, I can't recommend them, but I've said you might check these folks out, and no one has ever come back to me and said that was a terrible idea, Bill. So you're not going to find it cheaper. There are big companies that do this. Walters Kluwer, there's a couple others, that do this for big corporations where they handle their filings, but their fees are a lot more. So that's, but you
Okay.
can just Google registered agent in Massachusetts and see your own. But this outfit in Pittsfield, at least nobody's complained. Let me put it that way.
I have another question and I'm going to kind of answer it, but they're asking how good does your business plan have to be, or how far along does it have to be to go to the bank to not get turned down, etc. You could have your business plan reviewed by a SCORE mentor. They can read through it and see if it looks like you're at a good spot. They can, I mean, obviously they don't 100% know what the bank's going to say, but they can review it and look things over and let you know where you are in the process. If they're, they think you need more, less, whatever. So I'm going to leave that there unless there's something else Bill wants to add to that.
I'd just add that some of them were former bankers. And so, they can look at it and say, your ask isn't justified by your numbers, or, I think they can help you. But, and we do have great relationships with some banks that have more flexible lending criteria for folks that maybe traditionally couldn't get credit. So, I think your answer's spot on though, Teresa. Get to a mentor who works in this area and let them help guide you through it.
Okay. And then I have a question about grants and learning how to write grants. So SCORE mentor, same thing.
I would go to Score Mentors. Grants, grant money for profits is kind of hard to come by. There are some for, maybe folks from disadvantaged communities and so on, but it's very highly sought after. So if this goes back to your business model, if your model is assuming that you're going to capitalize your business on grants as a for-profit, you may want to reconsider whether you have a viable business, just as a general rule. Now, nonprofits, are going to be different. That's what they're there for. And that's what all the philanthropy is out there for, is to support nonprofits.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions. Certainly reach out to us if you have any other questions after today. And as mentioned earlier, we will post the recording should you want to listen through it again. It'll be on the score.org/Boston website under the local workshops and previously recorded in the pull down. And you can also get yourself a mentor from there. So thank you everyone for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Teresa.
Bye.
Bye.